So, today we're going to be talking about building muscle and losing fat or toning up, whatever word you want to ascribe to that. And this sort of general idea of wanting to get into better shape, but not wanting to commit to either putting on loads of muscle tissue or losing loads of body fat. So the problem that sort of lies with this is that building muscle tissue and losing body fat are two quite different processes. So building muscle tissue essentially relies on you strength training for one, progressively overloading and doing all of the other things that we normally do in our strength training, but also having an excess of calories and therefore an excess of building blocks from which you can build muscle tissue. Losing fat is sort of the opposite of this process. Training doesn't usually change much outside of potentially instituting some steady state cardio or just finding extra ways where we can increase our output. But we are removing our access to food and building blocks, so our body can then start pulling it from our stored fat tissue. So this is a desire that a lot of people have. Um, some people refer to it as toning up. Some people sort of refer to it as looking a bit more athletic. And there are plenty of level 2 personal trainers out there who will say there's no such thing as toning up, etc., etc. But you understand what they mean by that. And it is this idea of getting into better shape, but not having to commit as much to either one of the two, either through fear of, committing to a massive muscle gain phase and gaining an absurd amount of muscle, which I'm yet to see somebody do. If somebody figures it out, please do let me know. But also not wanting to have incredibly neurotic protocols surrounding their nutrition and not having it have to impact their life in a massive way. Now, it is possible for people to build some muscle tissue whilst they lose body fat, but it's a much rarer circumstance than people would like to imagine or people would hope so. So, in order to sort of establish whether or not you will be in the category of people who this is possible for, you sort of got to go through a checklist of things which make it more and or less likely. So the first thing and the main thing which will allow people to gain muscle tissue whilst losing body fat is whether or not they're in a state of being detrained. So, in the best case scenario for recomposition or building muscle tissue whilst you're losing fat, you will have been somebody who had a decent amount of muscle tissue in the past, and you are now going to gain that back now that you've got some excess body fat. This is because, generally speaking, it's easier to gain muscle tissue back than it is to gain it in the first place. This is just because some of the changes that occur when you do build muscle tissue are permanent, and your body, for lack of a better word, remembers this. So when you start training again, you'll get a lot of that progress back within the first month or so. Outside of that, another good place to be is a complete beginner. So if you've never really trained before, your body is going to be super sensitive to training, and you will get a good amount of progress sort of regardless of the caloric state that you are in. Obviously, this could be optimized through nutrition, but if you are looking to build muscle tissue whilst losing fat, this is another good category to be in. The next step down from that is being somebody who has quite a lot of body fat to lose. So if you're north of the sort of 30% body fat mark, you're going to be much more able to build muscle tissue whilst losing body fat than somebody who is sort of 15 or high teen percentage body fat. Now, the reason for this is because your body is going to prioritize certain actions over others, and building muscle tissue is, for your body, metabolically expensive. So it costs energy for it to build it, and it costs energy for it to maintain it. If you're already quite low on the fat percentage point, your body isn't going to prioritize building more muscle tissue as much as it is going to maintain the muscle tissue that you do have, and any other processes that you need to go on, so digestion just existing. So the more body fat you have, the more likely it is going to be for you to be able to build muscle tissue and lose fat at the same time. So if you're in both of those categories of people, you're in the best standpoint in regards to you being able to recomposition your body. If you're in one of them, it's decent, and if you're in none of them, it's going to be much, much harder for you. Now, you might have come to this and realized, okay, you've just told me that this is now impossible for me to do, but there is a line of progress for the rest of us to follow. So generally speaking, the best idea with this is if you do want to see a actionable, visible change to your body as quickly as humanly possible, losing body fat is going to be the fastest and most efficient way of doing that. So you dropping a couple of kilos, letting yourself see some of the muscle tissue that you do have is going to allow you to see the most visual change. Once you've got down to that point, you could then either hold there if you're happy with the result that you do have, or then begin the muscle building process after that. Now, there's a couple of advantages that come with dieting first. So, first reason is that it's going to provide you a bit of a buffer, body fat wise, for you to then build muscle tissue. So, whenever we're putting on muscle tissue, it's going to come with some amount of fat tissue gained. It's incredibly hard to gain meaningful amounts of muscle tissue without a little bit of fat, outside of doing some things which I'm not going to tell you how to do on YouTube. Anyway, the point being is that once you've got yourself to a slightly lower body fat percentage, it then buys you a bit more time to put on muscle tissue and gain some body fat without feeling uncomfortable with the way that you look. And then once you've completed that process as a whole, you could then diet back down, and the end result of that will be that you have lost body fat and gained muscle tissue. Now, this is going to extend your time frame out a little bit from what you initially thought, but if you just try and flip-flap between the two, so you say, I'm going to go through a body recomp phase where your calories are either slightly lower or slightly higher than what they were before, you put some cardio in, you're just not going to yield the same kind of result that you would have done if you had committed to one or the other first and then gone into the opposite of that. So whether you put on some muscle tissue first and then dieted down, or dieted down first and then put on some muscle tissue, either one of those is going to lead to a much better result than you trying to do both at the same time.